The morning the trouble started, my sister called me from the porch like she'd found a snake in the mailbox, breathy, annoyed, a little scared they put a lien on the house. That line hit me harder than I expected, because this was our place, the one Mom left us, the one I swore I'd keep when deployments and court dates let up. I'm Luke Hayes, and for most of my life, I thought the kind of anger that comes from people in suits and polished shoes was something you only saw in movies. Turns out it's the kind that shows up with printed letters, high-powered flashlights, and a badge that says Community Association. Silverbrook Commons looked like a catalog, the same beige trim, the same perfect mailbox posts, the same little flags on the 4th of July. It also had rules that would make a monastery feel casual, and a board president who believed those rules were a kind of religion. Evelyn Hartwell had a smile that fit on a business card and a grip that left a bruise on your calendar. Her husband, Reed, chaired the city planning committee and, conveniently, knew how to make problems disappear. When they decided our Jeep with the government comms rack in the back that I'd used for training violated some nebulous clause about commercial vehicles, it looked petty at first, but small petty things have a way of rolling uphill fast. My sister, Emma, is the kind of teacher who keeps snacks in her car for kids who forgot lunch and patience for neighbors who forgot manners. She's not the kind to start a fight, she's the kind to write the minutes afterward. But she called me in the middle of arithmetic homework and her voice wasn't the same. The violation notice called for fines for towing after 3 days. The first tow truck was a threat. The lien now, that was a promise. They started slow enough to be convincing. A letter about an improperly proportioned wreath. A notice that our mailbox number was off by half an inch. But behind the petty perfectionism was a pattern. The Hartwells were targeting military families, the ones who were out of town on duty, the ones who couldn't stand in public meetings every Tuesday at 7 p.m. They sent identical notices to 2 other houses down the block, homes owned by reservists, by a National Guard medic. When the neighbors tried to push back, Evelyn's smile became a shield and Reed's phone calls became a hammer. Emma started collecting things. Not weapons, God. No, just records. Minutes from meetings that listed rules no one remembered voting on. Invoices to companies nobody had heard of. Signatures that looked like somebody had traced them with a shaky hand. She put a small camera under the eaves, and not because she likes surveillance, because deeds and signatures aren't always enough when someone is willing to tell a story that paints you as the problem. One night, around midnight, her phone buzzed. Live feed, grainy. A man in a Silverbrook polo moving toward our driveway with bolt cutters. He crouched by the Jeep's wheel, hands steady, and then he ran a flashlight over the back where the comms rack sat, serial numbers prominent. Government-issued tags clear, as if the whole scene had been staged for a photograph. Emma dialed 911 like her knuckles had something to prove, her voice calm, but my stomach doing 1,000 cartwheels. By the time officers arrived, the men were gone, but the footage was there. The question that kept me awake wasn't whether they'd trespass at it, was why Evelyn needed those tags photographed like trophies. We could have done the small things, first letters, mediation, and maybe that would have been enough. But the more we looked, the more we found Evelyn's fingerprints in places that didn't belong. A shell company that got a contract to consult on community improvements, invoices that paid for landscaping and for private security patrols that started showing up in unmarked SUVs, and a developer who'd sniffed the block like a bloodhound looking for a bite. It wasn't personal vendetta anymore. It smelled like the slow unwrapping of a plan. Clear the small, cheap homes, by the lots, flip the neighborhood. It's not dramatic in a movie, since it's the business of money dressed up as civic pride. I started using channels I'd hoped never to touch, while home legal channels, phone calls, a quiet word with an old superior whose face I trusted. I'm not naive. I know how bureaucracy works. But when federal equipment, tagged and traceable, is endangered by a private entity, someone has to take notice. We looped in a military legal advisor and an agent who had the kind of badge that doesn't make noise but makes doors open. We put our evidence into neat folders and sent it to people who could translate it into something official. Emma organized the neighbors like someone arranging chairs before a storm. There were signatures, and there were people who had stopped answering at first because they were afraid of gossip or of losing their own quiet lives. But community stubbornness is a stronger glue than fear if you give it a reason. Evelyn played it like she had all the time in the world. Her side of the meeting had a presentation, charts on neighborhood standards, a calm voice about property values, a few well-placed barbs about outsiders, not respecting the comments. She was practiced. She was polished. One night at a board meeting, she leaned over and said, almost friendly, "You should know, Mr. Hayes, rules are rules." I remember the way the room filled with polite coughing, as if people needed to be reminded to breathe. I remember thinking, rules aren't neutral when someone writes them to hurt specific people. The break came because of a mistake, one of those tiny, human errors Evelyn couldn't stage away. She sent a draft of a memo to the wrong email, and in the header, buried between legal-sounding jargon, was a line about expedited acquisition and land assembly. It was enough. Enough for investigators to pull threads. Enough for a couple of city council members who weren't read to ask the awkward questions. Enough for the feds to start asking for receipts. What followed felt like a movie only when you watched the footage afterward. There was the night the towing crew showed up, and for a minute we thought it was for the Jeep. But as they opened the back gate of our lot, federal agents poured out of unmarked cars down the street, calm, purposeful, the kind of quiet you only get when people are trained to be serious about not creating scenes. People who'd been laughing at neighborhood drama minutes before dropped their coffees and folded like books. Evelyn sat at a little folding table, her lipstick perfect, her face a study in slowly changing panic. Reed tried, for a moment, to look like the supportive husband. It didn't work. We watched them lead people past our porch. We watched handcuffs glint under porch lights. The charges were detailed: embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction, civil rights violations, words that sound abstract until you're the one with tear tracks on your mailbox. The thing I remember most clearly is the way the neighborhood went quiet afterward, like someone had changed a radio station and left the players on pause. The aftermath wasn't neat. People called it vindication. That felt good for a second. There were settlements, and there were hearings, and there was a sense of relief when Reed lost his committee seat, and Evelyn finally let the mask slip into something more human, more desperate. Emma became more outspoken at meetings, not because she liked attention, she didn't, but because she discovered she was good at holding a room's attention and pointing out that the little things people wrote down on pink paper can add up to big crimes. We used settlement funds to start a small scholarship for kids of deployed families and to create a neighborhood transparency fund. We planted a bench by the elm and put a plaque on it that read something like, "For the ones who would not sit down." But not everyone was happy with the result. Some neighbors said we'd made a federal circus of a community problem, that lawyers and cameras had turned normal disputes into headlines, and they were right to worry. The line between community standards and harassment can be thin, and power can hide behind a smile. We argued about how much privacy is reasonable, about whether we'd been right to call in investigators, about whether justice for one side meant public shaming for another. I don't have a clean answer. I have a house that still has my grandmother's faded curtains and a street that now tolerates flags of different opinions, and sometimes that feels like a miracle and sometimes like a mess. When I came home from the last deployment, the neighborhood looked different, roof lines unchanged, grass still cut, but there was a different kind of noise, the sound of people actually talking in driveways instead of just nodding at barbecues. Emma met me with the keys and a smile that had a new line around it: mature, maybe, or just tired. We drank coffee on the back porch and listened to lawn mowers and a kid somewhere practicing a trumpet badly and perfectly. It felt like the world we wanted, messy and loud and human. If there's a lesson here, it's not a neat one. Document things, keep receipts, save emails, don't assume someone else will fight for you, but also remember that community is complicated. People hurt each other for reasons that aren't always malicious. Sometimes greed sneaks in under the guise of improvement, and sometimes petty rules cover deeper rot. Don't be afraid to stand up, but do it with a record, with neighbors, and with the expectation that justice is slow and messy, and sometimes it leaves scars that never quite fade. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have called the lawyers the moment you saw the first notice? Would you have let the towing truck take the Jeep and hoped the law would catch up later? Or is there a gray middle, something I missed, some way to stop this before it became a federal case? Drop your thoughts below. Share your worst HOA nightmare if you've got one, and tell me whether you think we did the right thing, because I'm still undecided, and I want to hear how other people weigh small rules against a life that matters. If this hit a nerve, share it, argue in the comments, and let's talk about whether communities are built to protect user to line someone's pockets.